Vice President Venkaiah Naidu has underlined the need to adopt new ways of living in the times of coronavirus and suggested a 12-point framework for this new normal to deal with the virus. In a Facebook post, he stressed on the need for new attitudes towards life and humanity amidst indications of the virus likely to stay for longer than earlier expected. In a post, after the government extended the lockdown on Sunday evening, the Vice President dealt with the philosophical and moral issues thrown by the COVID-19 pandemic and the way life needs to be lived henceforth. He underlined that life cannot be lived in isolation, and the virus outbreak highlighted the interconnectedness of lives. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze life after Corona and its social impact. Joining me on the program today are Dr. Gauri Shankar, Associate Professor, Clinical Psychology, AIMS, V. Rajalakshmi, Sociologist, Janki Devi Memorial College, DU, and Urmi Goswami, Assistant Editor of the Economic Times. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. V. Rajalakshmi, I'd like to begin the program with you first. Let's first try and understand and analyze the social impact that coronavirus has had on the people.
See, one of the most important thing is that to understand that our society is based on human relations, in the sense that for everything we need people to justify our actions. For example, when a child is born, we want people coming and giving blessings. When one is getting married, more than anything else, it becomes a relationship between two families which are established. So we expect a huge social gathering. So all these things is going to change. Why? Mainly because we are insisting on social distancing. One very important fact is that this virus has led most of us to believe, or rather we have started feeling scared. There is a fear complex in all of us that, and there is a kind of a social stigma also attached to it. And people don't want to admit that they are, affected by the virus also because, as I said, that there is a social stigma attached to it where people don't want to interact with one another. So keeping all these things in mind, the fear complex is going to take over our lives. And because of that, a society which is purely dependent, or rather to a large extent dependent on social relations, keeping relations away is going to be a tough thing. It will have a huge psychological impact. It can lead to a lot of stress among people. Why? Mainly because whether it's most of us believe in living in joint family. When I say living in a joint family, does not mean under the same roof people living, but is also that we have joint relationships. That is, for every occasions we expect people's support, blessings, and interaction. So that kind of a thing which is not going to be there is going to really lead to a lot of stress among relationships. Recently what happened was I had gone to a bank, and then I was just trying to inquire something from a person, and that person standing next to the main person to whom I was talking, interacting with, suddenly shouted at me saying, "Ma'am, dur rahiyega." So, that kind of a fear that the moment a person comes close to you is going to be increasing day by day. Now that the lockdown has been relaxed and people have started moving, I'm sure there's going to be, I'm not a doctor, but then as we keep hearing that the cases will increase, with the increase in cases, this kind of hiding, social distancing, fear, anxiety, uncertainty will be on rise.
Absolutely. All right, Gauri Shankar, this is where I'd like to bring you in. You've spoken about the social aspects of the social impact. Let's talk about the psychological impact as touched upon by V. Rajalakshmi, really, as far as the whole pandemic is concerned and how it is going to affect lives, and affect the lives of people as they learn to live with Corona.
Yeah, actually, Dr. Rajalakshmi has clearly pointed out that there are changes in social behavior, and we have to learn to live with these changes. If we are not in a position to learn, then it will be very difficult for the person. So it affects their psychology. Like as Madam pointed out, if there is some social function, so we have to go. If there is a childbirth, we have to go to give blessings. So if we are not able to do such things, it affects our psyche, it affects our mind. Okay, and this basically creates lots of anxiety, fear, depression, low mood. sometimes irritability. So there are varieties of psychological symptoms which arise, and it will be very difficult for the person to manage all these symptoms by his own or her own. So sometimes like social support is very important, and at this time where we have to follow social distancing, social support is not physically present. So but there are other ways like voice talk, chatting, or video call that can some like compensate all these things. But definitely due to this corona, people are going to have so many psychological symptoms in them. So we have to be ready for those things. And like we should talk about the prevention also, how to prevent, because these changes are going to happen. No one can stop these changes. So like social isolation creates lots of problems. So we have to try to mix up, try to talk to someone, not physically, on phone, on uh, and like sometimes we have not talked to our friends for so many time, so many months. We can talk to them. We can have video chat with them, and like we have to change in our lifestyle also, like daily routine, because if we are in a house, we are not doing anything, then it will be very difficult to spend 24 hours. So now I think there are some reports in the newspaper also, like domestic violence, child abuse, these cases are arising. Why? Because everybody is in the house and they have not planned anything for them. The days goes like itself. Okay, so we have to plan something. Okay, like there are different household chores, who is going to do what, that could be done one thing, and then we can enroll ourselves in certain online courses. We can do certain other things. We can learn certain other like singing, dancing. If it was our hobbies, we could not do due to lack of time. Now we have lots of time, so we can do lots of things. So if we focus on certain things like lifestyle, our thought process, our relations with others, so all these things basically gives us power to remain healthy.
Right. All right. So, Urmi Goswami, uh, talking about a new life, talking about a new normal, really, and learning to live with COVID, one of the biggest things is going to be how we can ensure that there is social distancing as well, because that is considered to be, or rather physical distancing, if you can call it that, that is considered to be one of the biggest, things as far as trying to keep yourself safe is concerned. So, how do we get used to all of that, and how do we deal with it?
So the first thing is that, as you said, we will be. It is not about life after, but it's life with COVID. And uh, you mentioned social distancing, which is in effect actually creating a physical distance and not isolation. Because as we open up, it means we are resuming a lot of the activities that we had prior to COVID, but we have to do it in a new way, and that includes sort of bringing in those practices that helps break the chain or slow down the rate of transmission, which is where physical distancing comes in. So the first thing we'll have to learn as a society is discipline. The fact that, when you are going to any place, whether it's to shop for your essentials or to shop for something that is non-essential, you respect the fact that there has to be a gap. You have to stand in a queue. You have to respect the fact that there is somebody ahead of you and you have to maintain a distance, and only X number of people can enter the shop at one point. So this and that discipline has to be learned across the board in every sphere of life. Then the other aspect that we'll all have to sort of take into account is managing our time better, because now the same act that would have taken us say 5 minutes may take us longer because of these issues of social distancing. But the human mind or the human being is full of ingenuity. It is not as if we will stop interacting. It is not that we have to continue our lives in isolation. We'll have to learn how to be better, and that is where discipline, management, understanding that yes, you have to be disciplined about wearing a mask. You have to be disciplined about how you how you adopt practices of basic sanitation. Now, if you look at us as a country, this is therefore an inflection moment for us, because we'll learn a couple of things that are critical for any nation: discipline, managing time better, managing resources better, better sanitation, and hopefully these will get reflected in policy, because it's not just that we will do things better, but it's how you design your cities. How do you create, design transport that reflects this new normal, which requires you to maintain physical distance? Because you have to remember that, yes, physical distancing is critical, but you have to remember that we are a huge population. So take a bus stand. If somebody has to get onto a bus or a metro car, if you do the physical distancing in the strictest sense, to get from point A to point B will take us far longer, because only so many people will be able to get into a metro car at one point. So therefore, we have to find new ways of creating, breaking this chain. That is what physical distancing or social distancing aims to do. So we have to remember that it is not just the distance, but the aim of that distance. So basically, it is that moment where we start taking certain basic sort of amenities or basic behavioral patterns more seriously.
Right.
So it is, yes, it changes the COVID changes the way we approach, but it's also that huge opportunity, because now consider this: when we talk about sanitation, it's about, just you have people who will spit anywhere. Practices like that have to come to an end. So it's about what you do personally and how it impacts collectively. So it's not enough that you wear your mask and we maintain the distance with the next person, but even with all that, if you just lift your mask and spit, that kind of defeats the purpose, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
How we litter, it changes everything. So our approach to these basic facts, a level of such as sanitation, a basic level of discipline, better management of resources, these are the ways that our lives will change. And if we actually focus on these things, we will have a life which is no less richer than the one you had prior to COVID.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. I'm going to take one of those aspects forward as well, about old habits and how we need to learn new ones as well and forget some of the old ones. I'll take that up a little later. But before that, we Rajalakshmi, man or humans are social beings at the end of the day. And in the past, of course, this generation hasn't seen anything like this. But in the past, mankind has seen several such epidemics or pandemics and has risen above all of them and learned to deal with it and learn to live with it as well. So how big a role does society play in all of this?
See, society definitely plays a very important role. See, our society has different classes, different stratas of people, and different people with different age groups. So what happens is that one of the most important thing, of course, all of us must understand is that today media is very active. Just few years back, one did not know so much about it. Today, everything is known to everyone. What is happening inside our homes to what is happening outside the country, everything is known to us. So therefore, the awareness has also increased. With that increase in awareness, the coping mechanism also has increased, or there are multiple choices to cope up. Having said that, one of the most important thing we must recognize is that we have different stratas of people. For some people, it is very easy to maintain social distances. If you have your own private vehicle, if you have if you have resources to work from home, yes, it can be done. But suppose if you don't have resources at home, and if you don't have your own private vehicle to travel around the place, it becomes very difficult. So therefore, there is always a kind of a consciousness among people that they have less resources to cope up with this situation. So that kind of mental stress also is possible. Two, as ma'am just mentioned, that yes, we need to adopt a new way of life of discipline. Yes, discipline can be maintained provided we have the resources to do that. Because in most of the offices, if you're expected to be on time, you cannot cope up with traveling in public transport by maintaining the physical distance as well as reaching on time. So these kind of challenges one has to recognize. One of the most important thing is that as students of sociology, we learn that culture has two components, the material culture and the non-material culture. And for a non-material culture to cope up with the material culture, it takes a long time. There is a long lag gap. And during this gap, different stratas, different section of the population get affected in different ways. So we need to understand that. That is very, very important. Now, post-COVID, or you can say that living with this COVID is going to be a big challenge because, as I said, that different stratas have different needs. As you just asked me that, what was like before about other problems or other things which the society faced and what is different today. Most important thing is the awareness and the options of coping up are more. We have advanced. The society has moved 10 steps forward for what it was earlier. We have medical facilities now. We have social platforms to discuss. We have a lot of social medias which can ease out the stress, also increase the stress. It's both the ways. That is both. It has plays a very important negative and positive role. So society, of course, needs to be together. There has to be a lot of social interaction. Most important thing is to understand the fact that there is no social stigma attached to it.
Right. Okay. All right. Taking the discussion forward, I'm going to take a couple of points that Urmi Goswami was making forward with you, Gauri Shankar. About old habits and old ways of life. It's very clear that we have to learn a new way of life going forward. How difficult is it to make those changes and make those adaptations and get rid of some of those habits and bring about behavioral changes?
Yeah, actually any change causes lots of stress, and everyone has a different way of taking this or managing this stress. So what happens whenever there is a requirement of change in behavior, we generally our first attempt is to avoid. So we try to avoid the change if we can. But if the rules are so strict, we cannot, like putting the mask, you cannot go out without a mask. So, but whenever we find a place where we can remove the mask, we remove the mask. So this is the human behavior. We always try to avoid, we always try to find out some shortcut. Okay, so that way changing the behavior, it will be a difficult task for most of the population in our country. But there is no other way, there is no shortcut this time. So we have to follow it. So following rules will again stressful for some of us. Okay, same way like at the background of like corona plus social distancing plus so many other rules plus loss of job, so, then loss of income for some of the businessmen. So there are so many negative impacts are there due to corona on people, and at the same time they have to make changes in their behavior, they have to make changes in their lifestyle. That is very stressful for them. But for making the change, they have to accept it that this change must be done. Without these changes, they are not going to survive in the future, or without going to make these changes, they will create problem for others. So such learning from the, or such information from the media should be spread in the public. I think it is going to be spread, and some of the media TV channels are spreading already. These are very much required. If you maintain the distance, physical distance, you will remain safe. If you put mask, you will remain safe. There is a less possibility of getting corona. So that way it is there. But I have seen some other news also where some marriage function is there or birthday party is there. More than 50 people are assembled on a terrace. So that way, like it is avoidance. Like there is no law, police are not there, police personnel are not there. So they found a safe place and they manage it. So we have to learn it. There should not be any shortcut. Whatever rules are there, we have to follow it in toto. And if we follow it, then after some time we become used to. Okay. Then there will be not a problem. But definitely change causes lots of stress, and we try to avoid stress. This is the normal
Abs-
reaction.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Urmi Goswami, talking about these rules, talking about behavioral changes, one, of course, how easy or difficult is it for us as a people to make those changes and to start obeying those rules? Because generally, people have a tendency to break the rules and go against the flow. So how do we deal with that kind of a situation? Do we need the authorities to deal with them with an iron hand? Maybe that is the approach that we need to use. Or there's another aspect to all of this as well. There are those who want to continue with their lives and go on with their lives and force through, but there are those who are completely in panic mode and are living in fear as well. So this is another aspect that needs to be addressed too.
Right. So, there are a couple of things. One is, of course, though the thing about a infectious disease or a disease as contagious as COVID is that what you do affects others and what others do affects you. So, in a sense, we talk about social distancing, but our interrelatedness, our interdependence is never more obvious than it is now, right? That's one aspect of it. The other, of course, is about people who are panic stricken. And at the heart of that is, of course, a lot of times information. Now, the other panelists mentioned about how the world has changed, and the only sort of real comparison we have is from 100 years ago, the Spanish flu. So clearly, we are much ahead on the information accessing curve than we were 100 years ago. But with access to information comes access to disinformation. So one of the things that we need to be careful again to take the other interdependence fact together is that what we choose to forward or what we choose to retweet or like has an impact on somebody else, and we need to be careful when we are pushing information, whether it's information that we generate or we just pass on, to be careful of what we pass on, because as you mentioned, there are people who are panicked, and if you tell them something that may or may not be correct, they will behave in a certain way, take that information probably as fact because it comes from somebody they trust, and utilize it. So each one of us have to become, let's say, better filters of information that we pass on. So that's critical. Two is and both these things are linked to awareness. One, about how our behavior impacts others, and two is that we can make a difference. If we learn to adopt new ways of being, which don't necessarily mean our lives have completely changed. I think a part of the problem also is that we tend to look at the new norms of COVID as or living with COVID as a extension of the lockdown. You're not going to continue to remain isolated in your homes. You just have to behave in a more responsible manner when you're interacting in the world, not just for others but for yourself, because you too are at risk, and therefore putting others at risk. That could be
Right.
your loved ones and friends, or just complete strangers. So yes, it is going to be difficult, but I think the more information that is put out there on the criticality of how protecting ourselves is critical, or behaving or following these new norms is critical to protecting ourselves, and in extension protecting the ones, our friends, our family, our loved ones, it
Mhm.
might help make the cut. Remember one more thing is that there will always be groups of people who will not want to follow the norm. We have had it in every instance. I mean, the reason, if you look at the whole vaccination campaign, you have a group of people who are anti-vaccination. So anti-vaxxers exist even when there is a larger majority of people who believe in vaccination. So you will always have that group of people. So we have to find a way to put more information to be able to persuade people that yes, there is a benefit to following the rules,
Sure, sure.
of course, and clearly making certain behaviors, disincentivizing certain behaviors. Uh, one hopes that with more information and realizing that that this contagious disease is not gone, may itself prove to be a disincentive to a whole lot of people. But it comes back to this: how do we get discipline? How do we learn to embrace the idea of discipline? The idea that rules are made very often, more often than not, to protect us and not against us. And sometimes the rules are not good, but we can have a rational conversation. I just want to just very quickly touch upon one of the 12 things that the Vice President referred to, and that is the reliance on science. We have often spoken about, the absence of a scientific temper, but this is a moment when we should embrace the idea of science and inviting science into our lives to understand things in a rational, logical way, not to act from fear or just panic.
Absolutely. I think they're very well put and very well summed up there by Urmi Goswami about what exactly needs to be done going forward. Time now to get quick closing comments from all my panelists. I've got limited time, so I'm going to ask you to be brief with the best way forward, starting first with you, V. Rajalakshmi.
See, one of the most important thing is that we must realize that our country is very diverse, both in terms of population composition, in terms of culture, and in terms of expectations from each other. It's easier said than done, mainly because needs are very different. We have different needs. Coping up with different needs is also very tough, stressful, but we must understand that it is for our own safety and safety of our family that we must try and change our thought process.
Right. Okay. All right. Gauri Shankar.
Yeah, actually any stress causes any psychiatric problems, any psychological distress. So here also we are expecting people will come with lots of distress. So the distress will remain in terms of like anxiety, depression, increased use of smoking or alcohol. So all those problems will be there. So my suggestion to the society is to become aware about their behavior. If there are negative changes in their behavior, they must consult, they must talk to their friends, they must consult the experts in the area. And like there are many social workers, psychologists, they are working in the field, so they can be helpful for them. So rather than covering up all those symptoms, be aware of these symptoms and discuss it with your friends and experts.
Okay, all right. And Urmi Goswami, quick closing comment from you on the best way forward.
Well, one of the things that the COVID crisis should make us realize is that despite the diversity and the differences that exist, what unites us is far greater than what divides us. And that is the desire to live and have a healthy life. And the other thing that COVID makes us realize, or should make us realize, is that we need to work together, because how we act impacts others, not just ourselves. And perhaps in understanding that there are certain basic behavioral changes that we have to make, which is not just about wearing a mask and maintaining distance, but about having due regard for sanitation, ensuring that we lead more orderly lives, that we maintain discipline where we are when we are in a crowd, and we can't run away from the fact that we are a densely populated country. So if we understand these basic facts and make them part of our lives, not only will we be able to live with COVID, but perhaps actually have fruitful lives and more productive lives. And once the vaccine comes, of course, then the game changes again.
Okay, all right. On that note, then I'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective.